The courtroom fell into an eerie silence, the kind that fills a room right before a storm. The gavel echoed sharply, and a chill ran through the air as Judge Collins' voice filled the space. "Guilty," he announced, the word hanging like a sword above them all. Alex's face went pale as his world crumbled. He had been hoping for something, anything, other than this. There was no mercy, no reprieve. Around him, murmurs began to rise, but they were drowned out by the pounding of his own heart. The room seemed to shrink, his vision blurring as his mind fought to process the weight of the verdict. He had trusted so many people. He had believed them. But now, his life had taken an irreversible turn. He glanced towards the gallery, his eyes meeting those of Sarah, who seemed as devastated as he felt. In that moment he understood, this wasn't just his battle anymore. A shadow moved through the room, unseen by most, but Alex felt its presence. And somewhere in the depths of the courtroom, a hidden truth waited. The air in the courtroom felt thicker now, as though the weight of the moment was pressing down on Alex. He could hear the murmurs from the crowd, but they felt distant, as though they were coming from another world. His mind raced, still unable to comprehend the verdict that had just been delivered. His eyes flicked between Sarah, who sat a few feet away, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table, and the empty witness stand where so many had spoken, but no one had heard the truth. Robert's voice floated through the haze, promising that there would be an appeal, that all was not lost. But it felt like an echo, hollow and distant, offering no comfort. Alex tried to listen, tried to believe, but deep down, he knew this was the beginning of something much darker than he had ever anticipated. Sarah's gaze met his for a moment, and in her eyes he saw the same question reflected. How did we get here? The truth felt closer now, but still just out of reach. Outside, the courtroom buzzed with activity, but inside, it was as though time had come to a standstill. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on him. Every breath felt like it took more effort than the last, the weight of the verdict pressing down on his chest. He wanted to scream, to lash out, but he couldn't move. Robert's hand landed gently on his shoulder, but it felt like a betrayal rather than comfort. "We'll fight this," Robert had said, but Alex couldn't bring himself to believe him. The words fell flat. Sarah, still beside him, was holding herself together for his sake, but he could see the cracks beginning to show. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale. She wasn't just grieving for him, she was grieving for the truth that was slipping further away with each passing second. Alex squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the sound of the crowd outside. But all he could hear was the voice of the judge, his words ringing in his ears. Guilty. The finality of it. The weight of it. Sarah's hand hovered over Alex, trembling slightly before she finally placed it over his. He felt the warmth of her touch, but it did little to calm the storm inside him. She gave him a soft, reassuring smile, though it barely touched the sadness in her eyes. "We'll get through this," she whispered, but Alex could only nod weakly. His mind was a blur of conflicting thoughts, guilt, anger, fear. He had been so sure. He had thought they were on the brink of winning, that the truth was on his side. But now, with the gavel's echoes still ringing in his ears, all of that felt like a distant dream. A fleeting hope he'd held onto just a little too long. He turned to her, searching her face for something, anything to hold on to. But Sarah seemed as lost as he was, and the weight of that shared despair was too much. He didn't know how much longer he could pretend that everything was going to be okay. The courtroom doors swung open, and the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Alex flinched, momentarily disoriented, but it was just the noise of the crowd beginning to disperse. His lawyer was already speaking to the prosecution, discussing the next steps, but Alex couldn't focus. His mind was stuck on the word guilty, a word that had become more than just a legal term. It had become his new reality. He hadn't felt this small since that night, the night everything changed. He had thought it was behind him, thought he had moved past the shadows of his past, but now they were closing in again. The truth, elusive and painful, had slipped through his fingers once more. He tried to breathe, tried to steady himself, but every breath felt too shallow. Sarah's words were a distant hum in his ears, as his thoughts spiraled downward. The world outside the courtroom had moved on, but for Alex, time had stopped. Alex walked down the cold hallway of the courthouse, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. The weight of the verdict was still heavy on his chest, but there was something else now, something darker. Every step felt like it was leading him further into a maze, one he couldn't see an exit from. He turned the corner, and his eyes met Sarah's. She was waiting outside, her expression tight with concern. She had been there through everything, but now she seemed to carry a weight of her own, something unspoken between them. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, but Alex could tell that even she was barely holding it together. He wanted to say something, to tell her it would be all right, but the words felt like they had been stolen from him. He had nothing left to give, nothing left to believe in. The truth, his truth, had been buried by a system that no longer seemed interested in seeking justice. "I don't know anymore," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "But I have to keep going." The next day, Alex sat in a small windowless office across from his lawyer, Robert Doughty. The room was sterile, almost suffocating, with white walls that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights above. Robert's voice was steady, outlining the next steps, but Alex couldn't focus. His mind kept wandering back to that moment in the courtroom, to the look on Sarah's face. He had to get through this, somehow. Robert's words were drowned out by a sense of impending doom. The walls of the room felt like they were closing in, each piece of advice from his lawyer slipping further away. Alex couldn't shake the thought that they were simply going through the motions, like everything else in his life. "We can file for an appeal," Robert said, but Alex wasn't listening anymore. He was only half aware, staring blankly at the papers scattered in front of him, wondering if it was even worth it. As the days dragged on, Alex couldn't escape the weight of the trial. Every corner he turned, he felt watched, judged, and helpless. Sarah had become his lifeline, but even she seemed to be distancing herself, consumed by her own grief. One evening, as Alex sat alone in his apartment, he picked up his phone. It was an old number, one he hadn't dialed in years. Hesitant at first, he finally pressed the call button. It rang once, then twice. And then the voice on the other end made his heart race. "Alex, what do you want?" It was Marcus, the person from his past he had tried so desperately to forget. Marcus's voice was colder than Alex remembered, and the line crackled with tension. "I need your help," Alex said, his voice tight. There was a long pause before Marcus spoke again, the tone one of disbelief. "You're asking me for help now?" Marcus agreed to meet, but the location was a place Alex hadn't visited in years, an old diner on the outskirts of town. It had the same worn-out charm, the smell of coffee and grease in the air. Alex sat at a corner booth, his nerves getting the better of him as he waited. When Marcus finally walked in, Alex barely recognized him. Time had aged them both. Marcus's eyes were colder, sharper, but there was a familiarity to his stance. As Marcus slid into the booth, Alex didn't waste time. "I need information. On the trial." "There's something I'm missing," Alex said, his voice quiet but urgent. Marcus studied him for a moment, then leaned back, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what you're after, but you're playing a dangerous game." Alex didn't flinch. He knew the risks, but he couldn't back down now. The truth had to be uncovered, no matter the cost. Marcus leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You're looking in the wrong place. The trial, the case, it's all a smokescreen. They're hiding something much bigger than you realize." Alex's pulse quickened. A smokescreen. Everything he thought he knew, the people he trusted, the evidence, was being manipulated, twisted beyond recognition. Marcus continued, telling him of an underground network, of corruption that stretched far beyond what Alex had ever imagined. "You'll never get the truth from the people you trust. It's all rigged," Marcus said, his words sinking deep into Alex's gut. But something about it didn't sit right with him. How could he trust Marcus now, after everything that had happened? Yet he had no choice but to listen. There were pieces missing from the puzzle, and Marcus was the key to filling the gaps. As Alex left the diner, The weight of the revelation settled heavily on his shoulders. The road ahead was darker, more dangerous, but there was no turning back now. Alex stood at the edge of the city, staring out at the skyline. The weight of everything that had happened so far was starting to crush him. The trial, the betrayal, the new revelations, it all felt too much. His hands were shaking as he looked down at the file in his hands. The documents were supposed to help him, to bring clarity, but all they seemed to do was deepen the confusion. He had trusted so many people, and now, even Robert's assurances seemed hollow. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper going on, something hidden beneath the surface. The more he dug, the darker it became. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. But who could he trust? Sarah? Marcus? Everyone seemed to have their own agenda. Alex squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, trying to steady his mind. No matter what happens, he thought, I can't back down. I won't let this ruin me. Alex met with Sarah later that evening at the same diner where they'd shared countless conversations before everything had gone wrong. She looked different now, more distant, less hopeful. Her eyes were still red from crying, but she was trying to hold it together for both of them. Alex, we can't keep going down this path, she said quietly, her voice tinged with concern. We're losing ourselves in this. You need to let go. Alex shook his head, his anger rising. Let go? The words felt like a slap. How could he let go when everything he'd fought for, everything he believed in, was being taken from him? I can't just let this go, Sarah. You don't understand. This isn't just about me anymore. This is about the truth, he snapped, his voice louder than he intended. She looked at him for a long moment, her gaze full of pain. And what happens when the truth destroys you? She asked softly. Alex had no answer. Alex couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the conversation with Sarah, the look of resignation in her eyes. He knew she was right in some ways. He was spiraling, consumed by a need for justice that was slowly turning him into someone he didn't recognize. The doorbell rang at 2 a.m., a harsh sound breaking the silence of his apartment. He opened the door to find Robert standing there, his expression unreadable. We've got a problem, Robert said, his voice low. The prosecution is pulling strings we didn't know about. There's a leak in the system. Alex's heart sank. He'd suspected something like this for days, but hearing it confirmed made his stomach churn. What do we do? Alex asked, his voice hoarse. Robert hesitated. We need to fight back, but this is bigger than we thought. We're up against people who know how to cover their tracks. Alex ran a hand through his hair, trying to absorb the weight of it all. This was no longer just about clearing his name. It was about survival. The next morning, Alex and Robert met at a dingy cafe, away from prying eyes. They needed a plan. We've got to find the leak, Robert said as he sipped his coffee, his voice low and urgent. If we can't do that, we're finished. Alex nodded, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. But who can we trust? We've already lost so much, he muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. Robert leaned forward, his face grim. I've been doing this for years, Alex. I know how these things work. But this is different. We've got powerful people pushing us into a corner. Alex sat back in his chair, trying to keep calm. If we don't act soon, he thought, everything will slip through our fingers. He met Robert's gaze. Then we find out who's behind it, and we make them pay. Alex spent the next few days following leads, gathering information from anyone who might be able to help. Every door he knocked on seemed to open into more confusion and lies. The more he uncovered, the less he seemed to understand. But there was one name that kept coming up. One name that connected the dots. The name of someone he never thought he'd have to confront. Marcus. He'd never imagined that the man who had turned his back on him would be the key to everything. Late one night, Alex found himself standing outside Marcus' apartment, the lights flickering above him. He hesitated before knocking. He wasn't sure what he'd find on the other side, but he knew one thing. He needed answers. The door creaked open, and Marcus appeared, his expression unreadable. You're back, he said, his voice flat. What do you want now? The moment Marcus stepped aside, Alex walked into the dimly lit apartment. The air was thick with the scent of stale cigarettes and old leather. Marcus shut the door behind him and leaned against it, crossing his arms. So what do you want? He asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Alex glanced around the cluttered apartment. He hadn't seen Marcus in years, but the man hadn't changed much. The same cold eyes, the same air of indifference. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, but he knew he had to push through this. You know what I'm here for, he replied, his voice steady, but laced with urgency. I need the truth, everything that's been hidden, the things you know about the trial. It's time to come clean. Marcus smirked, his lips curling. Come clean? You think I've got all the answers? You've got no idea who you're dealing with. Alex stared him down. I don't care what it costs, I need it now. Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. You think you can just walk in here and get the truth, he scoffed. Alex stepped forward, not backing down. I don't have time for games, Marcus. I need to know what you've been hiding. The corruption. Everything that's been going on behind the scenes. Marcus's smirk faltered for a moment, and for the first time, Alex saw a flicker of something else. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. You think I'm the one pulling the strings? You're wrong, Marcus said, his voice lowering. You're way in over your head, Alex. The people you're up against, they play a much darker game than you can even imagine. Alex didn't move, his eyes locked on Marcus. Then help me figure it out. Tell me everything. You know more than you're letting on. Marcus hesitated before speaking, his words slow and deliberate. All right, you want the truth? Then get ready. It's not going to be what you expect. Marcus's words hung in the air, thick with a sense of foreboding. The trial wasn't just about you, Alex, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You were a pawn, a means to an end. Alex took a step back, his mind racing. What do you mean a pawn? He asked, his voice shaky but insistent. Marcus looked at him with a mixture of pity and amusement. The people you're fighting against, they don't care about justice. They care about power. And you were the perfect scapegoat. Alex's pulse quickened as the pieces started to fall into place. So this was all planned? He asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. Marcus nodded slowly. Everything you thought you knew, everything you've been fighting for was manipulated from the start. Alex felt the weight of Marcus's words crushing him. He was in too deep now. There was no going back. The truth had just become even more dangerous. Alex spent the next few days chasing down leads, trying to piece together the truth Marcus had alluded to. The deeper he dug, the more he realized how far-reaching the corruption went. It wasn't just a few crooked officials. It was a network, a system designed to keep people like him in the dark. The weight of it was suffocating, and Alex felt like he was losing himself in the process. He met with Robert again, this time in a quiet cafe. Robert looked more disheveled than usual, his face drawn. We're in trouble, Alex, he said, his voice strained. The more I dig, the more I realize we're up against something much bigger than we thought. Alex leaned in, his gaze hardening. I don't care how big it is. I'm not backing down. Robert sighed. I know, but we need to be smart about this. We're running out of time. Alex's resolve hardened. Then we make our move before they make theirs. Alex knew they were running out of time. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous it became. Every night, he found himself waking up in a cold sweat, haunted by the faces of those involved. But he couldn't stop now. Not after everything that had happened. He knew he had to push through, no matter the cost. The trial, the betrayals, the secrets, they were all part of something bigger, and he was now in the center of it. But the closer he got to the truth, the more he realized that the people pulling the strings would stop at nothing to keep it hidden. That meant Alex had to be smarter, more careful. But the stakes had never been higher, and with each new revelation, it became clearer. There was no turning back now. The game was on, and Alex was playing for keeps. The courtroom was packed. Alex sat at the defense table, his body tense, every muscle screaming with anticipation. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, but he had never felt more alone. The prosecutor stood, giving his closing argument, his words sharp and precise, each one aimed at breaking Alex's resolve. "The defendant is guilty," he said, his voice booming across the room. Alex wanted to scream, to shout that it wasn't true, that the entire case had been manipulated. But he stayed silent, watching the prosecutor with a mix of contempt and disbelief. His attorney Robert sat beside him, whispering that everything would be fine. But Alex wasn't so sure. He had been through too much to believe that now. The truth was out there, hidden just beneath the surface, but could he expose it in time? The final blow came when the judge rose, his gavel echoing through the silence. "The verdict will be delivered in 1 hour," the judge said. Alex exhaled, knowing that this hour could change everything. Alex stepped into the hallway, the roar of the courtroom fading behind him. He needed a moment to breathe, to think. His hands were shaking as he ran them through his hair, trying to clear his mind. This was it. The final stretch. He had spent months, maybe even years, chasing the truth, and now it was slipping through his fingers. He turned around to see Sarah approaching him. Her face was pale, her eyes red from days of stress and worry. She reached out to him, her hand gently touching his arm. "Alex, we can't do this anymore. We need to let go," she said softly, her voice filled with concern. Alex shook his head, his frustration bubbling over. "I can't. I won't. Not after everything we've been through. We're so close." Sarah hesitated, then nodded, her face a mixture of love and fear. "Just promise me that no matter what happens, you'll be okay." Alex nodded, but deep down, he didn't know if he could keep that promise. The courtroom was silent when Alex returned. Every eye in the room was on him as he sat back down at the defense table. The tension in the air was palpable. Alex felt the weight of the world on his shoulders as he glanced at Robert, who nodded encouragingly. The prosecution was already prepared, the closing statements ready to be delivered. The judge, an imposing figure in his black robe, called the court to order, his voice cutting through the stillness. Alex took a deep breath, steadying himself. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but he focused on the task at hand. He had to find the cracks in the prosecution's case, the lies buried in their evidence. His heart pounded, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope. He wasn't going to let them get away with it. He would fight until the very end. "Your Honor," Robert began, his voice calm but firm, "we move to dismiss the charges. The evidence presented does not hold." The silence that followed Robert's words seemed to stretch on forever. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as the judge deliberated. The weight of the moment was suffocating. He felt Sarah's hand gently squeeze his, a small comfort in the storm of uncertainty. The judge finally spoke, his voice authoritative but somber. "The court will deliberate on the motion and render a verdict shortly." Alex nodded, but inside, a storm raged. His fight wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. There were too many unanswered questions, too many pieces of the puzzle still missing. The judge's decision was coming, but Alex had no idea what it would bring. The next few minutes felt like an eternity as they waited for the gavel to fall. Every second was a reminder that his future was hanging in the balance. The judge's gavel struck the desk, and the room fell silent. "The verdict is not guilty," he announced, his voice echoing through the courtroom. A wave of shock and disbelief washed over Alex. He had won. For a moment, everything seemed to blur together. The noise of the courtroom, the murmurs of the jury, all faded away as Alex stood up, his legs trembling. He was free. The weight that had been pressing down on him for so long finally lifted, and he allowed himself to breathe. Sarah, standing beside him, embraced him tightly, and for the first time in weeks, Alex allowed himself to feel the warmth of her comfort. But even as the cheers erupted around him, Alex knew that the battle wasn't over. The fight for the truth had only just begun. There would be more obstacles, more enemies, but for now, he had won. The truth had finally come to light. Alex stood in front of his apartment window, watching the city below. The night was silent, but his mind was anything but. The trial was over, the verdict delivered, but something still gnawed at him. He had been acquitted, but was it enough? His victory felt hollow. The truth had come to light, but at what cost? Sarah had been his rock throughout everything, but now even she seemed distant, her own burden weighing heavily on her. Alex turned from the window, his eyes drawn to the letter sitting on the coffee table. It had been sealed for months, unopened, yet now, the time had come. He slowly approached it, his fingers trembling as he peeled back the envelope. Inside, a single sentence awaited him. The real story has yet to be told. His heart raced as the realization sank in. His fight wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The next day, Alex met with Sarah in the same cafe where they'd spent so many hours together. The familiar setting now felt foreign, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on them. Sarah took a deep breath before speaking, her eyes avoiding his. "Alex, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "There's more to this than you know. More than you'll ever be able to uncover on your own." Alex froze, his heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. Sarah glanced up at him, her face filled with regret. "I've been involved in this from the start. I was part of the plan." Alex's stomach twisted as the words sank in. "What plan?" he asked, barely able to form the question. Sarah sighed, her expression heavy with guilt. "The one to destroy you." The revelation hit Alex like a punch to the gut. He had trusted Sarah, relied on her, and now, everything he thought he knew was crumbling. "Why?" he managed to choke out, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I didn't want to do it, Alex, but they had something over me. I didn't have a choice." Alex shook his head, the anger rising inside him. "You had a choice, Sarah. You always had a choice." Sarah's voice cracked as she spoke. "I couldn't lose everything, Alex. I couldn't lose you." The words hit Alex harder than anything else. His anger faded, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah looked away, the guilt and pain too much to bear. "Because I didn't want to lose you again," she whispered. "And now, I've lost everything." Alex spent the next few days in a fog. He couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, but a part of him understood. Sarah had been caught in a web she couldn't escape from. Still, the damage was done, and Alex was left to pick up the pieces. He met with Robert, who had been working tirelessly behind the scenes to expose the corruption. "We've got the evidence, Alex," Robert said, his voice firm. "It's all there, but we need to act quickly." Alex nodded, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. "We exposed them all, every last one of them," Alex said, his voice steady. Robert raised an eyebrow. "You sure? There's no turning back once we do this." Alex paused for a moment, thinking of the consequences. But then he remembered the injustice, the lies, and the betrayal. "We've come this far," Alex said, his resolve hardening. "We finish it now." Alex stood in front of the courthouse once again, his heart pounding in his chest. The final steps of their plan were in motion, and the moment of truth was upon him. He could hear the faint murmur of voices behind him, but all he could focus on was the door in front of him. This was it. The end of a long, painful journey. But as Alex stepped forward, he realized something. He had changed. The man who had walked into this fight months ago, unsure and broken, was gone. In his place stood someone different, stronger, wiser, and ready to take on whatever came next. The truth, no matter how dangerous, would come to light. And Alex was the one who would bring it out. The doors of the courthouse swung open, and Alex walked inside, ready to face whatever awaited him. Alex stood alone in the middle of a crowded city square, the noise of the world swirling around him. Everything had changed, yet he still felt as if he were standing at the precipice, looking down at a new world he wasn't sure he was ready for. The past few months had been a whirlwind, each twist and turn leading him here, to this moment of uncertain freedom. He had been to hell and back, fighting a system that tried to bury him, uncovering truths that were never meant to see the light of day. But as he looked around at the people moving around him, the mundane rhythm of their lives continuing uninterrupted, Alex couldn't help but feel a pang of emptiness. The victory had come at a cost, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the questions that lingered in his mind. Was justice truly served, or was it just a temporary reprieve? And what now? With the trial behind him, the world seemed vast and unfamiliar, like a landscape he had to learn to navigate all over again. Sarah met Alex later that day, and they sat in the park, the gentle rustle of leaves filling the air. "So what now?" she asked softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Alex sighed, his fingers tracing patterns on the worn wooden bench. "I don't know. Part of me thinks I should be celebrating, but it all just feels hollow." Sarah nodded, understanding more than she let on. "The victory didn't come without a price," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've lost so much, Alex, and so have I." Alex looked at her, his heart heavy. "I never wanted this to happen, Sarah. I didn't want any of it." She gave him a sad smile. "I know," she replied, her eyes filled with a deep sorrow. "But now we have to find a way to move on, for both of us." Alex stared at her, feeling the weight of her words. Moving on was easier said than done. The past would always be there, lurking just beneath the surface. Days passed, and Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The truth had come to light, but the world around him seemed unchanged. The people who had wronged him were still out there, untouched, and Alex couldn't let it go. "I don't think I'm done," he confessed to Robert during a late-night meeting. Robert looked at him, his face serious. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "You've won, Alex. You've cleared your name." Alex shook his head. "That's not enough. The people behind all of this, they're still out there. And they're still doing the same things." Robert hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he processed Alex's words. "What are you going to do about it?" Alex's gaze hardened. "I'm going to finish this. I'm going to expose them all." The decision was made. There was no turning back now. The plan was set into motion. Alex and Robert dug deeper, gathering evidence, talking to the few people who still had the courage to speak out. But every step forward felt like 2 steps back. The forces they were up against were vast and powerful, and Alex found himself questioning how far he was willing to go. Late one evening, as Alex looked over the files they had compiled, Sarah entered the room. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said softly, her eyes filled with concern. "You need to take a break." Alex looked up at her, his face drawn. "I can't. Not until this is over." Sarah sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've already lost so much," she whispered. "Don't lose yourself in this fight." Alex's gaze softened as he met her eyes. "I'm not sure who I am without this fight," he admitted quietly. "But I can't stop now, not when I'm so close." The final confrontation was inevitable. Alex stood outside the building, his heart racing as he prepared for the moment that would change everything. The evidence was in his hands, but the truth he sought would come at a cost. He knew that now. As he walked inside, the weight of everything, his past, his decisions, his fight for justice, settled around him. He was no longer the man he was when this journey began. The trial had only been the beginning. The real test was now. But as Alex stood face to face with those who had once tried to bury him, he realized something. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about him. It was about who he had become in the process. And no matter what happened next, he knew he had found his truth. "This is it," Alex thought, his mind steady and his resolve unwavering. "This is where I end it."